There.
Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is daf Gimel of Masechet Horayot. We are still on daf Bet at the bottom of Betam Bet, but let me share my screen and we will get really started. So yesterday, we're going to have a bunch of Rashi today. So yesterday in the opening Mishnah of Masechet Horayot, we saw that if the Sanhedrin rules that chalev is kosher, and of course we know that chalev is not kosher, it's a kind of fat, that then if someone individually follows that ruling, there's no obligation for that person to bring a personal sin offering. Now, if in fact the person had gotten confused between a piece of chalev and a piece of regular meat, and there was no ruling, and he knows that chalev is not kosher, but he just got confused and he thought he was eating kosher meat, but then it turned out to be chalev. Well, then he's obligated to offer a sin offering. Now, and so if in fact he only did it because the court ruled, well, then we're fine. But if the person has personal knowledge, whether he was on the court or something like that, and he knows that it's a mistake, and he follows the rule anyway, because he thinks that he must follow a rabbinic ruling, so then there's an obligation for that person to bring a sin offering. Meaning, you can't use it as an excuse. If in fact, and similar, we saw that if somebody is a general, he doesn't care about following the Jewish law. Well, then if that person doesn't care about following the Jewish law, so then, again, he can't use the court as an excuse to get out of the sin offering. So we suggested yesterday that this is the view of Rebbe Yehuda. But the rabbis say, you know what? That only when the majority of the community follows the ruling do we say that they don't have to bring a personal sin offering. And the reason is because when the majority follows the ruling, well, then the court or the community, we'll see that there's a debate on that issue, the court or the community needs to bring a special bull offering that is called a par shel davar, a par that for the sort of hiddenness of a particular matter, and that the fact is that they made a mistake. And so the point is that only when the majority of the community sins after the ruling do we say that it's a mistake that's going to result in that. And so as a result, only when when the community or the court needs to bring such a sacrifice do we say that, okay, we're going to alleviate the individual of their personal obligation. But otherwise, they would need to bring. And so we then cited two brises. The first brisa clearly aligns with our Mishnah. The second was a bit confusing, but we interpreted it as saying the following. Point number one, when a minority sins, not based on a ruling, meaning they sin just because they got confused about whether this piece was chalev or shuman, then they need to bring a sin offering, because if there had been a ruling, there would be no bull offering. While I might have thought that, maybe if the majority of a community sins not based on ruling, meaning we all just decide, you know what, we all think that this piece of shuman, this piece of chalev rather, is kosher, and we think, I can definitely eat it, and so as a result, we all eat it, and majority of the entire Jewish community eats it. Where you might have thought, hey, they all made a mistake together, let's make them have a bull as a community and not individual sacrifices. And we say no, notwithstanding the fact that you might have thought that, because the discussion in the Torah references from among the people of Israel, it teaches that even if there's a majority that sins, we're going to say that everyone needs to bring their own individual sin offering. And so what did that imply? It implied that if a minority sins based on a ruling, they would also bring a sin offering, because there's no bull offering. Meaning, just as we said with respect to minority sinning, when there is no ruling that they have to bring a sin offering because there's no bull offering, well, same thing we would say if in fact they sin based on a ruling. If there's no bull offering, well, then they have to offer a sin offering. And so as we pick up on the 10th line from the bottom of Betam Bet, Rav Papa wonders whether we have to accept this implication. And he says the following: Amar Rav Papa Mimai. How do you know? Maybe you could say that the Mishnah is that this brisa is assuming something else. Dilma lo hain velo bastin. Maybe when we say that there's no obligation of the bastin to bring a bull offering, we'll also say, if the people all relied on the bastin's ruling, that you know what, there's also no obligation to bring a personal offering. And so as a result, maybe this brisa does. Maybe this brisa is consistent with our Mishnah. Maybe it doesn't imply anything special. Well, one second. Ihachi my irya demikahadr al ruba lechiyuva. 1 second though. The whole basis of this brisa is to say that I might have thought something with respect to a majority that sinned. So lav miklal demiut behora kaimale demichayvu behora. It's clear that the implication is that a minority that acted based on the court ruling is going to be liable. V'nidar bereisha al miuta de mechayev b'shigigas masa. That look, if in fact you weren't going to do that, and you were going to say that you know what, based on a minority that acts with a relying on without a court ruling, that they're going to be liable. Well, then, it would still need to tell us. Why does it still need to tell us that a majority that acts accidentally? Meaning, if a minority that acts is going to be liable no matter what, well, then certainly a majority that acts is going to be liable. Elalav, it's not. That's not the point. Rather, we have to say, and this is based on the Masoras Hashas's language. So we're going to skip a little bit of wording and change the mahadar al ruba lechiyuva b'shigaz ma'isa shmamina miut b'hora chayavin hein kispa ve'useira. That we learned from the fact that a majority is going to be liable to bring their sacrifice. We can understand that a minority that acts based on a court ruling is going to still be liable for a sheep and a goat. Meaning that they're a female sheep and a female goat, which is what a personal sacrifice, a personal sin offering is made from. And similarly, when they sin without any by accidentally taking an action, that they're chayavin, they're also going to be chayav. So the bottom line is that Rav Papa's question is rejected, and in the end we have these two brisas. One brisa says exactly what our Mishnah says. One brisa implies that a minority that sins based on a ruling, the minority would each have to bring a sin offering because there's no bull offering. And so, but the question that the Gemara now says is, Michti, let's take a look at these two brisas. Tarvayu Stametanan. Both of the brises did not mention anyone's name. They didn't say Rebbe Yehuda. They didn't say Rabbanan. And so as a result, how do I know? Mimai de Kamaisa Rebbe Yehuda. How do I know that the first one that's like our Mishnah is Rebbe Yehuda? Uvas Raisa Rabbanan. And the latter one is the rabbis. Ema Ibcha. Maybe we could say it's the other way around. So man shamasle de darish miuta ki haigav. Now, well, 1 second. The first brisa that we cited noted the fact that we were going to learn 3 different limitations based on the specific language. That it says, im nefesh achas techata vishgaga ba'asota. These are 3 different exclusionary phrases. Well, you know what? There is somebody that used very, very similar language in a different brisa. And you know who that person was? That was Rebbe Yehuda. And so just as Rebbe Yehuda had that kind of language elsewhere, we're going to note it must be that's Rebbe Yehuda that taught this one here. Because Rebbe Yehuda, Tanya, Rebbe Yehuda Omer, we've got a brisa that says that Rebbe Yehuda said, as we turn to the Gimel Amud Aleph, Zos Toras HaOlah. This is the rule of the Olah. And so we have the word Zos, we have the word ha'olah, and we have the word he, hare elu shlosha miudin. And Rashi goes on to tell us that what are the three limitations. The point is that if in fact the offering was slaughtered at night, then it wouldn't be a good offering. If it was blood was spilled before it was thrown on the altar, it was also not be a good offering. And if it was if the blood was removed beyond the Beit Hamikdash, it would also not be a good offering. And in each of these cases, if some of the animal were put on the altar, it would need to be taken down off of the altar. And it's based on these three limitations. But the bottom line is that we see this exact same language that we had in our first brisa, in a brisa that is clearly authored by Rabbi Yehuda. And so therefore, it's got to be that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of that first brisa. And you know what? I have a second proof that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the first brisa, because you know what about the second brisa? There's something about the second brisa that clearly cannot be like Rabbi Yehuda. Because what did the brisa say? Adayan ani omer lo matzis mukmas la Rabbi Yehuda. You know what? The second brisa can't be like Rabbi Yehuda. Because and that brisa began, I can still say, and so that's referencing the second brisa. The katani rov kal shechatu based in mivian al yadehen par. Because what did we say? We said that if a majority of the congregation sinned, the court brings a bull. The court brings a bull. The Rabbi Yehuda. And if it was Rabbi Yehuda who was the author, Ha'amar Tzibur Hu Damaiti, he's the one who says that the obligation to bring the bull offering when a majority of the community follows an error ruling, a mistaken ruling of the court, of the Sanhedrin, it's the public that brings the offering, not the court. Based in low, not the court, because Ditanan, we have the following Mishnah. This is a Mishnah that we're going to see, God willing, in a couple of days, I think on Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Shiva Shvatim Shechatu, if you have 7 different tribes that all sinned, Meviin Shiva Parim, they each bring a separate bull, because we focus on the community, and each tribe is considered its own community. And therefore, he would not agree with the fact that it's the court that brings the bull. So he could not possibly be the author of that second brisa. So we've shown 2 different reasons why the second brisa can't be like Rabbi Yehuda and the first brisa is like Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so now that we've got this all aligned, our Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. Well, you know what? Our Mishnah may be also like Rabbi Meir. V'Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel Zo Divrei Rabbi Meir. Rav Nachman says, you know what? It's also Rabbi Meir, our Mishnah. Aval Chachamim Omrim, the Chachamim say, Yachid She'asa B'Hora, based in Chayev. And the rabbis say, no, of course not. Again, the point is that the rabbis disagree. And so is saying that if in fact an individual sins based on the court, and it's not the majority of the community, well, then you know what? He's going to have to bring a sin offering. Exactly, because there's no bull offering. And so there's a real logic to that. Now, again, there's a logic to both approaches. The logic to the not bringing any offering is because I didn't do anything wrong. The court told me to do it. Yeah. So that's one. And the other approach is, look, somebody did something wrong. Because at the end of the day, the person ate something that's not kosher. Yeah, sure, the court told them it was okay. But the bottom line is somebody did something wrong. We need, as a community, we need that atonement. Yeah. And since nobody is going to bring the bull, because the bull is only brought if the majority of the community sins, so we need each individual to bring their carbon. So again, we have these 2 different approaches. But my Rabbi Meir, my Rabbanan, how do I know that there's a opinion that the rabbis say and an opinion that Rabbi Meir says? Tanya, because we have a baraisa that has both the Chachamim and Rabbi Meir in it. Horuvi asu, if they ruled and they acted. Now, obviously, when it comes to the ruling, that's got to be referring to the court. But who's the asu? Who is the acting in this brisa? Not completely clear. And we will see that that's going to be the core element of our evidence that it's going to be that this brisa shows that Rabbi Meir is like our Mishnah. But in any event, Rabbi Meir poter the Chachamim mechayvin. Rabbi Meir says that you're exempt, and the Chachamim say, no, you're chayiv. So man asu, who is it that took the action, that did the wrong, that followed the wrong ruling? So Elema based in, if you say that it's the court, well then my time of Durabanan de Mechayvi. Why would the rabbis make them liable? What, on what basis are they liable? V'hatanya yochol horu based in, v'asu based in. If the based in, I might have thought that if the based in ruled and the based in acted, Yachol Yehu Chayavin, it might have been thought that they should be liable for a communal bull offering. After all, they're the ones who are the core actors in reaching the mistaken decision. Talmud Lomar Hakal Va'asu. No, the Torah specifically says that connects the congregation and the action. It must be that the congregation acts. Ma'aseh Talui B'Kal. When it comes to the action, that depends on the entire congregation. It's the ruling that depends on the court, not the action. And so as a result, if the court acted, you're not going to have a bull offering. You'll have maybe individual sin offerings, but you won't have a bull offering. So clearly, we can't. This brisa shows that the maaseh in the earlier brisa that we said horu va'asu can't be referring to the court acting, because no one would say that they're liable for a bull offering. Okay, because otherwise we would have a disagreeing opinion in this brisa. Elahoru based in va'asu rovkal. So our next thought is, well, maybe the court ruled and it's a majority of the congregation that acted. But that can't be either, because everyone agrees. My time of Rabbi Meir depoter. Well, in that case, why would Rabbi Meir say that you're exempt from the bulk offering? Because everybody agrees that if a majority of the community follows the error of the Supreme Court, of our Sanhedrin, well, then everybody agrees that there's going to be a bull offering. Par halam davar. So elalav horu based in va'asu miyutkal. So what must it be talking about? I'll see you later, Mark. It must be that a court ruled and a minority of the congregation acted. Uvaha kamivligi. And so as a result, they're precisely arguing in the machlokas between the rabbis and Rebbe Yehuda. Rebbe Yehuda from our Mishnah, the rabbis from the other brisa the second brisa that we saw yesterday. And so Marsav, our Rebbe Meir, would think Yachad she'asa b'horas based in Pater. If you have an individual who acts based on a mistaken court ruling, well, then that person's going to be exempt from a personal chatas. Umar Sabar, and the rabbis think Yachad she'asa b'horas based in Chayav, that in fact, if he acts based on the erroneous court ruling, so then he's going to be liable for the personal sin offering. So Amar Rav Papa, no. Rav Papa says, no, I can give you, you know what? I can give you 4 other possible explanations for the brisa. Because remember, the brisa is very unclear. It just says they ruled and they acted, and one says pater and one says chayiv. So what could it be? Maybe Tekuli Alma, really everybody agrees, Yachad she'asa b'horas based in Patur, really an individual that acts is exempt. Ela based in Mashlim Lerov Tzibur Kamiflagi. What they're arguing about is what role does the court play in creating a majority? So imagine a population of 1 million Jews. Well, let's do a more realistic number, 20 million Jews in Israel. So, and so we have 10 million, and that includes the Sanhedrin. So we have 10 million that have sinned. That's not a majority because we need 10 million in one. So 10 million sinned, but not included in that 10 million is the entire Sanhedrin. And you know what? All 71 of them also sinned. So do we include them in the majority? So as in the calculation, and so as a result, we have 10 million and 71, which is now a majority, and therefore the community brings a bull offering? Or do we say, no, you don't include the Sanhedrin, and therefore we have 10 million and it's not a majority? So Mar Savar, the rabbis think, based in Mashlim L'Rov Tzibor, that the court can complete the majority, and therefore there is going to be liability. Umar Savar ain't based in Mashlim L'Rov Tzibor. And Rebbe Meir says, no, the court doesn't count. So that was possibility number one. Possibility number two, we're going to offer now. Horu based in Va'asu Rubo Shel Kal. If the based in ruled and a majority of the community acted, Uman Chachamim. And now, who are the Chachamim who say that in fact that you're going to be you're going to be liable? Rabbi Shimon it's Rabbi Shimon. The Amar Tzibor Mighty. That the community who's because and it's Rabbi Shimon who says Tzibor Mighty, Ubeitin Mighty. That in fact we're going to see that Rabbi Shimon takes the position that not only does the court bring the bull offering, but the community brings the bull offering. So the reference to being chayiv is actually like Rabbi Shimon. And the point is that the Tanakama, namely Rabbi Meir, says that, you know what, you're not liable because he only says that the court brings the bull offering. Whereas Rabbi Shimon says not only does the court bring, but also the community brings. And so that is the second possibility. The Ibayasema, a third possibility, Shevet She'asa B'Hora Beis, maybe we're dealing with a court that followed its with a tribe that followed its particular court. Uman Chachamim, and who are the Chachamim? Rabbi Yehuda, it's Rabbi Yehuda. And Detanya, Shevet She'asa B'Horas Beis Dino, Osa Shevet Chayav. That Rabbi Yehuda says not only do we apply this to the entire Jewish people, but we will apply the principle of Paralam Davar even when you have a single tribe acting. So it's the tribe's highest court that ruled, and the tribe follows the ruling of its highest court, and a majority of the tribe followed it. And so as a result, even in that situation, Rabbi Yehuda says that you are liable, and so he's the Chachamim in this brisa, and Rabbi Meir would say, no, you're not liable. The Ibayazema, or a fourth explanation, Kagon Shechatu Shisha Vehain Rubo Shel Kahal. Well, maybe what happens if the people who sin constitute 6 tribes, which is not a majority of 12. Right. 6 is not a majority of 12, right. But it's a majority of the people. So you have 6 large tribes, right. And that's a majority of the people. So Shiva Afal Pisha Aina Rubo Shokal. Or maybe you have 7 tribes, but it's not the majority of the people. So Umasnis in money. And now who is this brisa like according to the rabbis who say you're chayiv? Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar It's Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Titania. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishmo. And Rashi says that this is referring to Rabbi Meir. Chatu Shisha Vehain Rubo Shel Kahal. If you have 6 tribes sin, but they constitute the majority of the entire Jewish people, Shiva, or 7 tribes, Avabisha Einon Ruba Shel Kahal, Chayavin, you're going to be liable. And so as a result, the rabbis in the brisa that we cited, they follow Rabbi Shimon's ruling, and the Rabbi Meir in that brisa would disagree and say, no, until a majority of both the tribes and the Jewish people both sin, you're not going to be liable. You need a majority of everything. And so as a result, we've now offered 4 different explanations. And so you do not need to say that Rabbi Meir and the rabbis also in this brisa also disagree about the same topic, that we have the disagreement between our Mishnah and the brisa that we saw yesterday. Okay, so now we have we have indirectly addressed the need for a majority of Israel following the mistaken court to trigger a bull offering. The Gemara now defines the geography associated with that majority. Amar of Azi, uvehora, when it comes to a ruling, halach achar rov yoshvei Eretz Yisrael. What matters is what's the majority of the people who are living in Israel. Shneamar, as it says, Vayas Shlomo va'es hahi es hachag, that Shlomo had a party when he dedicated, this is when he dedicated the Beit HaMikdash. V'chol Yisrael imo kal gadol. And it was, everybody from Israel was with him. It was a humongous congregation. Milivo Hamas ad Nachal Mitzrayim. And it was from Hamas until Nachal Mitzrayim, until the river of Egypt. Livnei Hashem Elokeinu. It was all in front of God. Shiv'as Yamim, the Shiv'as Yamim, 7 days, and then 7 more days. Arba Asar Yom, a total of 14 days. We can consider this a sort of a Daf Yomi coincidence, although it didn't happen. This happened in Tishrei. It overlapped, in fact, with Yom Kippur, and it was the one time that we didn't fast as a Jewish community on Yom Kippur because it was considered a holiday. In any event, the bottom line is that the point is michti. Let's take a look at these words. Ksiv v'kol Yisrael imo kahal gadol. It said that all of Israel was with him, a huge congregation. So then why do I see milavo Hamas ad Nachal Mitzrayim lamali? Why do I need you to tell me the geography? Shma mina hanihu de'ikre kahal. That the people in that space, that's considered the congregation. So aval hanach lo ikre kahal. But the rest, the people who are outside of that area, are not considered the congregation. This has interesting implications today in connection with how we view our role, especially in Chutz La'aretz, in advising Israel. That at the end of the day, the people in Israel, they are the ones who have to make the decisions for themselves. And so while we can certainly encourage and influence, we have to be careful not to make the decisions for them. Okay, so Pshita, Merubim Nisma'atu. So in second, now we're going to see, so in the Mishnah on Yud Amud Aleph, we are going to see that if someone sins and is appointed Nasi or Kohen Gadol before bringing his sin offering, the rabbis say, you know what? Even though if these people had sinned once they became Nasi or Kohen Gadol, they would have to bring a special offering. They still bring the regular sin offering. On the other hand, Rabbi Shimon says, you know what? If he learned of the sin before the appointment and he figured out, oh, I sinned, but now I'm appointed, yes, absolutely, he brings a regular sin offering. But if he learned of the sin only after the appointment, then he's not liable for anything. He can't bring a regular sin offering because when he learned about his sin, he was now a Nasi or a Kohen Gadol, and they bring a different kind of sin offering. So he can't bring the original kind of sin offering. And he can't bring the new sin offering for being a Nasi, namely a he-goat or a bull for being a Kohen Gadol, a he-goat for being a Nasi and a bull for being a Kohen Gadol, because he didn't do the sin when he was the Nasi or the Kohen Gadol. So now the question, so now the Gemara is going to ask a question based on that machlokas. So pshita merubim v'nisma'atu, if in fact you had a majority of the community sin following the ruling of a court, so as a result you originally were going to be liable for a bull offering, and v'nisma'atu, and now you know what happened? Unfortunately, some of the people who sinned died. And now it's no longer a majority of the community. It was very close, the numbers. And now it's no longer a majority. Hainu plukta Rabbi Shimon v'Rabbanan. So the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon, that argument applies here. Namely, the rabbis would say, look, you were already obligated for the bull offering, so you still give the bull offering. And the Rabbi Shimon would say, well, right now, you're no longer subject to the bull offering, so you can't give the bull offering. So mu'atim v'nisrabu mai. So that's clear. But what would be the ruling if you originally had a minority? So when the sin happened, it was a minority that acted in the following the court ruling. But now a bunch of the people who didn't sin died. And so now all of a sudden, this minority is now the majority. Mi pligi Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. Would Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis actually argue here as well? So and now more detail. Rabbi Shimon de Azo Baser Yediyah Mechayev. That specifically, Rabbi Shimon focuses on when you became aware of the sin. And so he would say, well, now that the majority is, and let's assume that you only realize the mistake when you find out that it was a majority, but you know that in fact, when it actually happened, it was a minority. So we can focus on the moment that you learned about it. Correct. And therefore, maybe you would still have to bring that bull offering. V'rabbanan de azlas basar chadas, and the patri, and the rabbis who say, no, you focus on the moment of the sin. And so therefore, we're going to exempt you. Oh, lo, or no, or do we say no? What matters? Maybe there's a difference. So according to Rabbi Shimon, maybe there's a difference because, hey, here there was no liability whatsoever for any kind of sacrifice earlier. And so as a result, once there's no liability for any sacrifice, we're not going to make him offer the bull offering if it changes. And the rabbis could say, no, you know what? Even though ordinarily we follow the moment of the action, if in this case, we're going to follow the moment that you're liable because we don't want no offering to be made. Oh, lo. So again, do we say this or not? The Tizbra. So the Gemara says, you know what? You cannot make this analogy. This analogy is not a good analogy because Amor de Shamat le Rabbi Shimon de Azal af basar yediyah hechi de havi yediyah v'chata b'chiyuv. Look, why did Rabbi Shimon say, you know what? What matters is the moment of identification of knowledge. That when you learn about when the individual who's appointed as Nasi or Kohen Gadol learns about it before they get appointed, so then they are going, even though they haven't yet brought it, well, then they're going to focus just on that moment of knowledge. But if in fact they get appointed first, we're going to say that they don't have to bring anything. That's because the point is that why do they bring it if they learned about it before they got appointed? Because you had both the action, both the sin and the awareness at the same time. But here, Yediyah de lo chata mishamat le. But here, when you don't have both of the action, you have the knowledge, but no action. Because here, the action was never one that caused liability, because it was a minority that sinned. So when the action happened, there wasn't any liability. De'im kain laiti ki hashta. If in fact you were going to tell me that all that matters is whether or not when you find out, and the moment of action doesn't matter, well then when it came to a Kohen Gadol or a Nasi, if he learned about it after he was appointed, well, then let him bring the special Kohen Gadol or Nasi sacrifice. But instead, Rabbi Shimon says that you're not liable at all. So, Eli Rabbi Shimon chata b'yediyah bai. Clearly, Rabbi Shimon requires both, and so as a result, clearly in this case, Rabbi Shimon would certainly say that you are not liable. And so there is definitely not the same machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis in the case where there was originally a minority and then that minority turned into a majority because of the death of other people. Okay, so now we're going to have a series of 4 questions, and these 4 questions are going to result in a teku. Let's take a look. But because they all build one on the next, we're going to, in generally, we paskin that the way that it builds, that's the halacha. So let's take a look. Ibailu horu beisin chelev mutar va'asu miyut hakal v'chazru beisin bahen v'horu va'asu miyut acher. So what we have is the court originally rules that this chelev is kosher, and then a minority, we'll call it a third, ends up of the Jewish people eats the chelev, and so they sin. Then they realize, oh my gosh, we didn't mean that this chelev is kosher, and they turn back and they retract the ruling. But then, as it turns out, they ruled that the same chaylev is now kosher again. So they made the same mistake twice. And now another third of the Jewish people eats it. Now that 1/3 and 1/3 are different, and we end up with 2/3 of the Jewish people sinning, and now we have a majority. Do we combine the two or not? That's the question. So mahu, do we combine them? Kavan dishtei dios ninhu lo mitzdarf. Do we say that because there are two different moments of awareness? There's a moment of awareness regarding the first mistake, and then there's a moment of awareness regarding the second mistake because the first mistake was originally corrected and then it was made again. Odilmon Kavan to Idi because both of them are the same sin, we're going to combine it. All right, so now we're going to assume that, let's say you combine it, which means that we're going to postman that you do combine it. If you say, you know what, because they are both chaylev, we're going to combine them. What if the two different rulings are about two different types of chaylev? So we have one chaylev that's on the tummy, that's on the stomach, and one chaylev that's on the intestines, and we have those two different things. And 1/3 of the Jewish people sin based on the first one, the 1/3 sin on the basis of the second one. What do we say? To betray kare kaase lo mitzdarif. Do we say, well, there are two different kinds of verses that are involved here? Do we therefore say that they don't combine? Oh, Dilma came into Idi chaylev or do we say, no, look, the bottom line is they're both chaylev, they both go by the same name. And if you say, you know what, actually, they're both the same sin, we're going to definitely include the two together, which means, again, that we follow that viewpoint and we would combine them. What if you have two different, completely different sins? Eating chaylev, the impermitted fat, and eating blood. So now you have two differences. These are definitely two different prohibitions. And since they're not completely along the same lines, maybe they don't combine. Odilma, Kaven, de Karban Shava, Mitzdarif. Or do we say, no, they offer the same sacrifice? And so as a result, because they have the same sacrifice for having made this mistake, we can combine them. And so as a result, again, we end up saying that we're going to combine them because now the Gemara builds on that. If you say, you know what, because they have the same sacrifice, we're going to combine them, what happens? What if the sins where the court said that, you know what, this chaylev is kosher, and you know what, you can worship an idol, that this bowing down to an idol is not considered idolatry? What about that situation? Not only do we have different prohibitions, but we even have different sacrifices associated with it. So therefore, do we say that because a sin with respect to offering an idol offers a different sacrifice because there idolatry requires a she-goat, whereas a regular sin offering can either be a she-goat or a female sheep. So Odilma Kaven de Idi Kareshum Mitzdarf, or maybe we just focus on sort of the worst case penalty, the penalty of both idolatry and eating chaylev is the penalty of kares, of being cut off from the Jewish people. So maybe they can still combine. So on this last one, we say teku. We don't know. It's going to have to be unresolved. But the other three, in the end, because of how we paskin, we're going to be strict in connection with this last one, which probably means that we would not combine the two, and we would not make them have to offer the same sacrifice because we don't want to have an unnecessary sacrifice. We're not allowed to bring unnecessary sacrifices, and all the other cases we would combine them. All right, so that was the next question. Now the Gemara is going to discuss another question that will also end in the same answer of teku. Let's take a look. Ibailahu. Horu Beistin shechelev mutar. A court rules that chelev is permitted. V'aso miyatakal. And a minority, let's say 1/3, violates. Umeis osu Beistin. And now that court all dies. V'amad Beistin acher v'chazru v'horu. And you know what? Another court comes up and no, they say the same thing. Same thing. And now the second minority does it. And so now we have 2/3 and we have a majority. So do we say that now we had a majority and therefore they're going to have to bring the bull offering? So aliba deman de'amar based in mighty lo tibailach. Now, if in fact, remember we've seen this already, we haven't seen it the main source, but we've seen that there is this machlokas between whether we say that the court brings this bull sacrifice or the community bill brings the bull sacrifice. Now, clearly, if the court brings the bull sacrifice, the first court ruled and it's all dead, so they can't even bring the first sacrifice at all. And the second court ruled and only a minority followed them. So clearly, neither court could ever bring that bull offering. So the whole listener, well, they don't. The first one doesn't exist. Elakiti boilach. So rather, the question that I can ask you is aliva demanda amar tzibor maiti. Only according to the one who says that the community brings, because it's the same community. At the end of the day, we had 1/3 following the first ruling, 1/3 following the second ruling, but it's all one Jewish community that followed it, and now we have a majority. So my Tzibor HaKai, do we say that this community, the congregation exists, as we turn now to Gimel Amabet? O Dilma, Yediya Dehahu based in Dehorubina. Or do we need that the knowledge comes out at the moment that the majority has sinned? And we don't have the knowledge associated with either ruling resulting in a majority of the community sinning. So teku, we leave it, it's unresolved, and so we'll need to wait for Eliyahu. Okay, so now the Gemara addresses how many judges of the Sanhedrin or in the Sanhedrin must participate in the mistaken ruling. Meaning, what if we had a case where 65 judges said that this chalev is kosher, but 6 judges said, you know what, it's not kosher? Is that also going to be a situation of a par that we're going to have to bring or not? That's the question. And so, okay, so let's take a look. Amar Rabbi Yonatan says, if you have 100 judges. Now, you may say, well, one second, I thought there are only 71 judges in the Sanhedrin, and you're absolutely right. But the bottom line is that on occasion, on an ad hoc basis, you are allowed to add more judges. And the point is that Rabbi Yonatan is saying, even in that case, even if you add more judges, the following is the rule. Ein chayavin, there is no liability for a bull offering for a par elam davar ad shiyoru kulan, until all of them rule. Meaning, you need unanimity. Shneamar im kol adas Yisrael yishku. We need that the entire assembly shall err. Ad sheyishku kulan, until everyone makes the mistake. Ad shetivshot hora b'chol adas Yisrael. And meaning that the ruling needs to spread throughout the entire assembly of Israel, meaning the entire assembly referring to the Supreme Court, referring to the Sanhedrin. So Amar Rav Huna Braid Rav Oshaya Hachinami Mistabra. And you know what? It makes sense. The Bekol Torah Kula Kaimalan Rubo Kukulo. In general, we always see that a majority is like the entire. V'hachaksiv Kol Adas. And yet here, it specifically says that you need the entire assembly. And so as a result, it seems like it's got to be even if it's 100. Now, although this seems to be an okay proof, we're now going to challenge it 3 times, and the final result is that we're going to disprove Rav Huna's proof. So even though it sounds like a group proof, but we're not, even though we're disproving Rav Huna's proof, we're not undermining the main rule. The main rule is that you need 100% of the judges to rule in order for there to be in order for there to be a bull offering, for the court to be considered to have made a mistake. So Tanan, 1 second, we learned in our Mishnah, Horu based in, if the based in ruled the Yada Echad Mehen Shato, and one of them, meaning one of the court members, realizes that they made a mistake, O Talmud V'roi Lahora, or a student who's worthy of ruling, knows that they made a mistake, and then he goes ahead and he acts based on the court, whether he acted with them, whether they acted and he acted afterwards, or whether they didn't act and he acted by himself, this guy is going to be liable for a sin offering because he knew better. And so as a result, he's going to be liable. This, and what's the implication? This guy is going to be liable. Meaning somebody else who didn't realize about the mistake, he would be not liable. And what's our situation? Our situation is where one of the court members realizes that there was a mistake. So, but why should the rest of the community not be liable? It wasn't a unanimous decision by the court. So maybe it was a unanimous decision. That the one who will eventually realize that it's mistaken, when the court ruled, he nodded along with them. Meaning, although he was thinking to himself, hey, I think this is mistaken, he went along with the majority, highlighting that we shouldn't go along with the majority just because they're the majority. So as a result, that is not a proof. That is not a contradiction to our statement that we have to follow all 100. And so as a result, Rabbi Yonatan's ruling is good, and Rav Huna's reasoning also works. Well, Tashma, again, let's try and challenge it. Horu based in, this is from a Mishnah that we're going to see, God willing, possibly tomorrow. Horu based in Dalan and Bet. If the court ruled the Yada Echad Mehen Shato, and one of them knows that they made a mistake, Va'amr Lahen, and he says to them, Toin atem, you are mistaken. Hare elu paturin. Well, in that case, they are all exempt. Well, what's the implication? The implication is only because he said you're mistaken. If he had just kept his mouth shut, well, then they wouldn't be exempt from the bull offering. And so as a result, Taima de Amar Lahen Toin Atem B'Dipturin Hashasik Mishtak Chayavin the Gamar La Hora, and so the ruling would be finalized even if one of the people did not formally agree to it. V'Halo Horu Kulan, and yet we would have a case where they didn't all rule. So again, Amrei Hachanami here too, Kigon Shehirkin. Barosho. We're dealing with a situation where the last judge nodded along with them. So as long as he shows some level of agreement, that is going to be considered agreement, and therefore they will have all been considered to have ruled. All right, so as a result, it's clear that we still have Rabbi Yonatan's statement, and it still works, that you need all of the people to have ruled. Well, Rav Masharshia asks, 1 second, we have the following brisa. Samchu Rabbi Seinu al Divrei Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. They rely on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel of al Divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Rabbi Tzadok. Shahayu Omrim. That what do they say? Ein goes in Gzeira al Hatzibor. We do not impose a decree on the public. Ela imkain rova tzibor yachol la'amod ba. This is a principle that we've seen elsewhere. As long as if the community can't handle a decree by the rabbis, well, then we can't impose that decree on the community. But Amar Rav Ada bar Abba, and Rav Ada bar Abba said, what's the basis of this rule? Mikra, b'me'era atem ne'arim, b'osi atem kovim hagoy kulo. With a curse you are cursed, and yet me do you rob the entire nation. So as a result, the point is that you need a majority, the entire nation, in order to be sufficient. And what do we say that the entire nation refers to? It's a majority. But one second, but here we use the word all. So why shouldn't it mean that you need all of it? And yet we say that a majority is sufficient. So to Yuvta de Rabbi Yonatan, so this is actually a refutation of Rabbi Yonatan, Elam to Yofta. And so it is, in fact, an undermining of Rabbi Yonatan's ruling, or more specifically, on some level, it's really an undermining of Rav Huna's proof to that ruling. In any event, that ends the discussion, and we've now refuted it. And so the Elamai Kol Adas to Kama Rachmana. All right. Well, if you've now refuted it, well, what does it mean by the entire assembly? Why does the Torah tell us Kol Adas in connection with the community following the mistaken ruling? Hachikamar, Ika Kulam. You need all of the court to be present. Hav Yahora. Then it is a valid ruling. The lo hav Yahora. So actually, in the end, we say that you don't need you don't need unanimity in the ruling. You need unanimity in the presence. Let's just get a little bit further to get to the Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Yoshua, Asara sheyoshvin bedin, kolar taloy b'tzavar kulan. That if Rabbi Yoshua says along these lines that everybody is needed when you make a judgment, that if you have 10 sitting in judgment, there is a chain around all of them. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Of course, they're all going to participate. They all share responsibility. Hakamashmal, and here's what it's teaching you. Dafilu talmud bifnei rabo. Even if there is somebody who is a student of somebody else in the group, and they're part of the same court, they need to recognize that they need to speak up if they see something mistaken. Rav Huna ki hava nafik lavei dina. When Rav Huna would go to the court, mighty asara tanai debei rav lekame. He would always bring 10 students with him. Ki hekedim nimtayan shiba bikshura. That the idea is that they would each bear a little bit of the beam. They would each carry a little bit of the load. And similarly, Rav Ashi ki hava mighty Terefta lekame, when somebody would ask a question about a treifa, mighty asara tabache mimasa mechasia, he would bring 10 butchers from Masa Mechasia, umosiv kameh, and he would sit them in front of them. So as a result, they would say something if they saw something that was mistaken. Amar ki hekad nimtin shika Shiba mikshura. And so as a result, each of them are going to bear a bit of the burden. Okay, so we will stop there. We're still, these are big dafim, so we're not getting anywhere near as far as I had hoped, but we'll start with the Mishnah, God willing, tomorrow, and we'll pick up from there, looking forward to continuing our learning together. Have a wonderful, wonderful day, and looking forward to seeing you tomorrow.
Thank you.